The supermarket trolley wheel kept catching on something sticky as I pushed it down the cereal aisle, and the fluorescent strip light above me flickered like it was trying to send me a warning in Morse code. I remember the smell most of all, that mix of floor polish and the faint copper tang of blood from my own split lip, dripping onto a packet of Weet-Bix that had burst open at my feet. Tinned peaches rolled past my shoes. A liter of Anchor Blue top milk lay on its side, glugging out across the lino in a slow white tide. And standing over me, with that smile I'd come to know far too well, was the man my daughter had married. If you're watching this all the way through from somewhere here in Aotearoa or anywhere else around the world, do me a favor, drop a comment with the town you're listening from. I want to see how far this old fella's story travels. Because what happened next in that Pak'nSave on a wet Tuesday afternoon changed everything for me, for my daughter, and for the smug bastard who thought a man of 71 was too soft, too lonely, and too stupid to fight back. My name is Edmund Hallowell, though most people who've known me longer than 5 minutes just call me Ed. I was born in Greymouth on the West Coast in 1954, the son of a coal miner and a school teacher, and I spent 43 years working as a structural engineer before my knees and my wife told me, in that order, that it was time to slow down. We'd settled in Tauranga back in the early 80s when our daughter Imogen was still in nappies, bought a modest brick and tile place on a quarter-acre section in Bethlehem, and that house became the center of everything we built together. My wife, Marguerite, passed in the autumn of 2023 after a short, brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. 18 months by the time I'm telling you this story, and there's still mornings I reach across the bed for her before I remember. Imogen is our only child. She's 38 now, works as a pediatric nurse at Tauranga Hospital, and she's the spit of her mother, same auburn hair, same way of tilting her head when she's trying not to cry. She married a man named Travis Brockwell in 2019, a wedding I paid for in full because his side of the family, by his own telling, was complicated. Travis is 42. He sells commercial real estate, or at least he says he does. In 5 years of being his father-in-law, I've never been entirely sure what he actually brings home, only what he spends. And he spends like a man who's certain the bill will land on someone else's desk. In the months after Marguerite died, I was, I'll admit it, a wreck. I lost about 12 kilos. I stopped going to my Tuesday lawn bowls at the Mount Maunganui Club. I let the garden Marguerite had built over 4 decades go to seed, and the rosemary hedge she'd trained along the front path turned woody and brown. Imogen would come over once a fortnight at first, then once a month, then less. She'd bring shepherd's pie in a Pyrex dish and sit at the kitchen table and ask me, in that careful nurse's voice, whether I was eating, whether I was sleeping, whether I'd thought about seeing someone. I always said yes to all 3. I was lying about 2 of them. Travis started showing up more often around the 6-month mark. Always with Imogen at first. Then, on his own. He'd let himself in with the spare key Marguerite had given Imogen years ago and walk through the house like he was doing an open home inspection, tap the walls, open cupboards, stand in the back garden with his hands on his hips, surveying the land like he was already drafting up a subdivision plan. The section is just over 1,000 square meters, which doesn't sound like much until you remember what Tauranga land has done in the last 15 years. Marguerite and I bought that place for $42,000 in 1983. The last rateable valuation came in at $1.6 million. Edmund, he said to me one Sunday in late June last year, while I was rinsing out a teacup at the sink, "Have you given any thought to what you're going to do with this place? It's a lot of house for one man." I told him I hadn't given it much thought, which was true. The house was paid off. My superannuation and my engineer's pension covered everything I needed. I had no plans to go anywhere. He nodded slowly. like a doctor receiving disappointing test results. Just, from a financial planning perspective, Imogen and I have been talking. We could help you. There's some really good options out there for people in your position. Retirement villages with full medical, all that. Free up some capital. Help the next generation get on the ladder. You know how it is. I dried my hands on the tea towel and said I'd think about it. He smiled and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. That's the thing about men like Travis. They don't start with the slap in the supermarket. They start with the hand on the shoulder. And every time you don't flinch, the hand presses a little harder. Over the next few months, the visits got worse. He'd bring documents, brochures from a place called Somerset that he'd printed off the internet, with little yellow post-it tabs sticking out of them. He'd sit at my kitchen table, Marguerite's kitchen table, the curry one her father made her as a wedding present, and spread them out and talk at me for an hour while I made him cups of tea I didn't want to drink. He started referring to my house as the asset. He started referring to me, when he thought I couldn't hear him on the phone in the back garden, as the old boy. Once, just once, I heard him say to someone on the other end of a call, "Look, mate, the old boy isn't going to last forever. And when he goes, that section is going straight to Imogen, and Imogen is straight to me, so just hold tight." I should have said something then. I know that. Every comment I'm going to read on this video later is going to point that out, and you'd be right. But grief makes you slow. Grief makes you doubt your own ears. And I told myself I'd misheard. That I was being a paranoid old man. That Imogen had chosen him for a reason. And surely I owed her the courtesy of trusting her judgment. The first time he raised his voice at me was at Christmas. We were at their house in Paispa, a flash 4-bedroom thing with a heated pool that I happen to know they're paying $2,300 a fortnight on the mortgage for. I'd brought a pavlova that I'd made myself from Marguerite's recipe card. And I'd brought a bottle of Church Road Tom that I'd been saving for 15 years for a special occasion. After lunch, when Imogen was in the kitchen with her cousin Bryony, Travis pulled me aside in the hallway. He'd been drinking. He smelled of expensive bourbon. "That section in Bethlehem," he said. Not even bothering with hello. "I've had a developer mate look at it. He reckons we could carve off the back third. Put a 2-bedroom unit on it. Sell it off. Split the proceeds. You'd clear maybe 400 grand and still have your house. What do you say?" I told him no. I told him politely. But I told him no. The garden wasn't for sale. Not the front. Not the back. Not any of it. Marguerite was buried in Paispa Cemetery, and her roses were still alive in our backyard, and that was where I intended to stay until I joined her. His face did something then. The smile didn't move, but his eyes went flat, like a possum's in a torch beam. "You know what your problem is, Edmund? You're selfish. You sit on that asset, contributing nothing, while your daughter and I work ourselves to the bone. You ever think about that? You ever think about anyone but yourself?" Imogen called out from the kitchen asking if anyone wanted coffee, and his face snapped back to that smile, and he walked off, whistling. I didn't tell Imogen. I should have. I went home that night and sat in Marguerite's chair in the lounge and stared at the wedding photo on the mantelpiece for about 3 hours, and I cried like I hadn't cried since the funeral. Then I dried my eyes, and I made a decision that I want every single person watching this to remember. I made the decision to start paying attention. The next morning, the 26th of December, I drove down to Mount Maunganui and walked the length of the beach, and I thought about what Marguerite would have done. Marguerite was the practical one. Marguerite kept the books for our small consulting business for 30 years. Marguerite never threw away a receipt or a contract or a bank statement. Marguerite, may God rest her, would have told me to stop crying and start thinking like an engineer. So that's what I did. The day after Boxing Day, I rang an old friend of mine, a solicitor named Hamish Pendray, who I'd known since university in Christchurch. Hamish is 74, semi-retired, and operates out of a small office above a chemist in Greerton. I told him everything. The hand on the shoulder, the brochures, the asset, the conversation in the hallway. He listened without interrupting for 40 minutes, took notes in green ink with a fountain pen, and then he said something that I want every older person watching this to write down somewhere safe. He said, "Ed, the time to protect yourself is before you need to, not after." Over the next 8 weeks, Hamish and I quietly restructured everything. The house in Bethlehem went into a family trust with Hamish and a chartered accountant from Hamilton named Vivian Akers as the independent trustees, alongside myself. Imogen was named as the sole discretionary beneficiary, with strict provisions that no transfer, sale, or encumbrance of trust property could occur without unanimous trustee consent and a 60-day cooling-off period. My superannuation accounts were moved to a new bank where Travis didn't know I had a relationship. I drew up a fresh will, an enduring power of attorney for property in Hamish's name only, and a separate one for personal care in Imogen's name. And then, on Hamish's specific advice, I did something I would never have thought of on my own. I bought a small voice recorder, the kind a journalist might use. I clipped it inside the breast pocket of the rain jacket I always wore, and I started carrying it everywhere Travis was likely to be. Now we come to the Tuesday in March I told you about. The 4th of March, to be exact, a wet autumn afternoon with a southerly coming in off the harbor. Imogen had rung me that morning and said Travis was going to swing by to take me to the supermarket, that she was on a long shift and worried I wasn't eating properly, that he'd offered to help. I knew immediately something was wrong. Travis had never offered to help with anything in his life that didn't have a direct return on investment. But I said yes, and I clipped the recorder into my pocket, and I waited. He pulled up at 2:30 in his Ford Ranger. Didn't get out, just leaned on the horn until I came down the path. I climbed in and he didn't say hello. Just reversed out of the drive at twice the speed he should have. We drove to the Pak'nSave on Cameron Road in near silence. He kept tapping his thumb on the steering wheel. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye like he was about to say something and then deciding against it. Finally, as we pulled into the car park, he turned the engine off and looked straight ahead through the windscreen at the rain on the windscreen wipers and said, quite calmly, "I need you to sign the section over to Imogen. This week, I've got a deal that needs the equity. It's going to make us all rich. Don't fight me on this, Edmund." I didn't answer. I just got out of the ute and got a trolley. Inside, he followed me down every aisle, getting more agitated by the minute. I took my time. I picked up a pottle of Tauranga butter and put it down. I read the back of a packet of Vogel's bread. I asked a young woman stocking shelves where they'd moved the Marmite to. By the time we got to the back of the store near the dairy fridges, Travis was vibrating. There were maybe a dozen other shoppers around us. A young mum with a baby in a front pack. An older Maori gentleman in a high-vis vest doing his after-shift shop. A teenage girl with green hair stacking yogurt into the chiller. "Edmund," he hissed, leaning over the trolley. "Did you hear what I said in the car? I need an answer." I picked up a block of tasty cheese and placed it in the trolley. "I heard you, Travis. The answer is no. The answer was no in December, and the answer is no now. The section isn't mine to give away anymore, even if I wanted to." His face went the color of cooked beetroot. "What do you mean it's not yours?" "I put it in a trust. In January. With independent trustees, Imogen is the beneficiary. But no one can sell, transfer, or borrow against it without 3 signatures and a 60-day notice period." For about 4 seconds, I saw the truth of him written all over his face. The greed, the calculation, the realization that the long con he'd been running had just hit a brick wall. And then something in him snapped. He grabbed the side of the trolley and yanked it sideways. Hard. The whole thing tipped over and went crashing down onto the lino. The bread split, the eggs cracked, the milk burst open, the tinned peaches rolled in 6 different directions. The noise was extraordinary. Every head in that section of the store turned to look. Then he shoved me. Open hand. Hard. Against the chest. I'm 71 years old. I had 2 knee replacements in 2019. I went down sideways into the dairy chiller, and my hip hit the metal edge, and I felt something tear that I'm still rehabbing now. My head clipped the corner of the chiller and split my lip, and I tasted blood. He stood over me, breathing heavily, and he said, loud enough that everyone in that aisle heard him, "Pick it up, you parasitic old leech. Pick up every single thing. You owe me that much." The young Maori gentleman in the high-vis was the first to move. He walked straight up behind Travis and said, quite calmly, "Bro, step back from the elder. Right now." Travis turned to swing at him, and the man, who I later found out was a 46-year-old corrections officer named Hemi Waitoa, coming off a shift at Waikaria, simply caught his wrist mid-air and held it there. Held it like a vice. Didn't twist. Didn't escalate. Just held it. And waited. The young mum had already pressed the assistance button on the wall. The teenage girl with green hair had her phone out and was filming. And bless her, she was filming everything. She'd started filming. She later told the police. From the moment Travis had pulled the trolley over, I sat up against the chiller, and I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. And I reached into my breast pocket, and I took out the little voice recorder, and I held it up so Travis could see it, and I smiled at him. I smiled at him, the same smile I'd seen him give me 100 times. And I said, in a voice loud enough for everyone in that aisle to hear, "It's all on tape, Travis. Every word in the car. Every word right now. Every word at Christmas. Every word for the last 6 months." The color drained out of his face so fast I thought he might faint. The store manager arrived. 2 more shoppers had gathered. Hemi was still holding Travis's wrist. The manager, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Raywin, took one look at me on the floor, with blood on my chin, and said, "I'm calling the police. Sir, please do not move from where you are. Has anyone got first aid?" 3 people did. I was offered a chair, a bottle of water, and a packet of frozen peas for my hip before the police arrived. The 2 officers who turned up were a Sergeant Connaught and a Constable Raymonds. They took statements from me, from Hemi, from Raywin, from the young mum, from the green-haired teenager who'd captured the entire incident in 4K from 3 meters away. They watched the video right there on her phone, and I watched the older sergeant's jaw tighten as he saw the trolley get tipped, the shove, the words. They took the voice recorder from my pocket and bagged it as evidence. And then they arrested Travis on the spot, on charges of common assault on a person over the age of 65, and intentional damage. As they walked him out of the store in handcuffs, 3 security staff from the supermarket flanked them on either side. Because by that point Travis was thrashing and screaming, and the manager wasn't taking any chances. The hardest part was still ahead of me. The hardest part was Imogen. I rang her from the back office of the supermarket while a paramedic checked my hip. She was on her break. She picked up on the second ring, that bright nurse's voice. "Hi, Dad. Everything okay?" And I had to tell her. That her husband was in a holding cell at the Central Police Station, that he'd assaulted me, that he'd been trying to coerce me into transferring my house, that I had recordings of all of it going back months. There was a silence on the other end of the line that lasted about 11 seconds. I counted. Then she said, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, "I'll be at your house in 20 minutes." She arrived in her hospital scrubs. She walked through the front door and she sat down on Marguerite's chair in the lounge. and she didn't say a word for a long time. I made her a cup of tea. I put it in front of her. I sat opposite her in my own chair, the way Marguerite and I used to sit every night for 41 years. And I waited. "How long?" she finally said. "6 months that I've got on tape. Closer to 2 years, if I'm honest with myself about the things I should have noticed sooner." She nodded slowly. Her hands were shaking around the mug. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" And here is where I want every parent and every adult child watching this to listen carefully. Because what I said to her then was the truth. And it's a truth that I think a lot of families need to hear. "Love," I said, "because I didn't want you to have to choose, and because I wasn't sure you'd believe me, and because I was ashamed that I'd let it get this far, and because the man you married was very, very good at making sure no one saw what he really was. None of that is your fault. None of that is on you. But I needed evidence before I could speak, because I knew that without it, he would have spun a story, and you would have been caught in the middle, and I couldn't do that to you." She put her face in her hands and she cried for a long time. I sat with her. That's all you can do. Sometimes. Over the next week, Imogen went through the recordings herself. She listened to all of them. Every single conversation. In chronological order. Sitting at my kitchen table with a notepad and a glass of Pinot Gris. She didn't ask me to be there. She wanted to do it alone. And I respected that. By the end of the week, she'd packed up everything she owned from the house in Pak'nSave and moved into her old bedroom upstairs while she figured out what came next. She filed for divorce on the grounds of family violence within 10 days. The protection order against Travis was granted at first hearing. Travis pleaded not guilty initially, then changed his plea after his lawyer heard the recordings and saw the supermarket video, which by then had been viewed on the local news website almost 200,000 times. He was sentenced in late August to 10 months home detention, a $4,000 reparation order, and was placed on the family violence register. The judge, a stern woman from Rotorua named Justice Wareriki, said in her sentencing notes that what Travis had done represented a calculated and sustained campaign of elder financial abuse, and that the only reason he wasn't going to prison was because the victim had so thoroughly documented his own protection in advance. The civil side took longer. Hamish Pendray handled it for me. By the time the dust settled, Travis was bankrupt. The Pak'nSave house had been sold, and the proceeds split. And Imogen walked away with enough to put a deposit on a small townhouse in Papamoa. She kept her maiden name. She's never gone back. I want to tell you what I've learned from all of this. Because I'm 72 now. And there are a few things I wish someone had said to me before Marguerite died. The first is this. If you are a parent, and you have built something over a lifetime, do not assume that love is the same thing as protection. Love your children. Love your in-laws, if you can. But protect what you have built with paperwork, with trusts, with independent trustees, with lawyers you've known for 30 years. Love is not a legal document. Generosity is not a defense. Anyone who tells you that putting protections in place is a sign of distrust is, almost without exception, planning to take something from you. The second is this. If someone in your family raises their voice at you, lays a hand on you, or speaks to you with contempt even once, even in private, even when they later apologize, you are not being paranoid for taking it seriously. You are being sensible. Write it down. Note the date. Tell one trusted person outside the family. Patterns of abuse never start with the worst incident. They start with the small ones. And the small ones are the warning system that you ignore at your own cost. The third is this. If you are grieving, and I know there are a lot of you watching this who are, please understand that grief makes you a target. Predators in families and outside them know that a person who has just lost a spouse is slower, sadder, more easily flattered, more easily manipulated, Marguerite would have spotted Travis in about 10 minutes flat. It took me 18 months because I was drowning. There is no shame in that. But there is wisdom in knowing it, and in deliberately slowing down every major decision in the first 2 years after a loss. Sign nothing. Sell nothing. Transfer nothing. Wait. The fourth is this. Tell your adult children less, not more, about the specifics of your finances, until and unless you have absolute certainty about who they have brought into your circle. Marguerite and I were always open with Imogen about the house, about the value, about the will. That openness, in another family, would have been a beautiful thing. In our family, it became a map that her husband used to plan a heist. I do not blame Imogen for that. She trusted the man she married, the same way Marguerite trusted me. But the lesson stands. Information shared with one person becomes information shared with everyone they sleep next to. Plan accordingly. And the fifth and last is this. It is never, ever too late to fight back. I am a 72-year-old man with 2 replaced knees and a hip that still aches in the rain. And I beat a 42-year-old career manipulator using nothing more than an old solicitor friend, a $40 voice recorder from Noah Leeming, and the patience to wait until he made a mistake in public. If you are being mistreated by someone in your family, you are not powerless. You are not finished. You are not a parasite or a leech or a burden. You are a person who has built a life, and that life is worth defending with every legal tool the country gives you. Imogen and I had Christmas dinner together this past December at the house in Bethlehem. Just the 2 of us. She made the pavlova this year, from her mother's card. We sat at Marguerite's cowrie table and we ate. And we talked. And we cried a little. And we laughed a little more. The roses Marguerite planted along the back fence are blooming again because Imogen has been helping me prune them on her days off. The house is in the trust. The trust is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And Travis Brockwell, last I heard, is living in a 1-bedroom flat in Hamilton and working night shifts at a petrol station, which is, I think, more justice than the courts could ever have delivered. If you've watched this all the way through, thank you. Truly. Comment the town you're listening from down below. I read every single one of them, and it means more than you know to a man who used to feel very alone in a house that was too big for one person. Look after the elders in your family. Look after yourselves if you are one, and remember that silence is the oxygen that men like Travis breathe. And that the moment you start documenting, the moment you start telling the truth, the moment you start clipping a little recorder into your jacket pocket, that is the moment they begin to lose. Kia kaha out there. Stay strong, and take care of one another.